Thursday, May 28, 1914. In the harbor at Quebec City, crew members of the Empress of Ireland are loading provisions for the Atlantic crossing to Liverpool. Since its maiden voyage in June 1906, the Empress has become a favorite of passengers making the cross-Atlantic journey. Some make the trip as a vacation, others on the return passage as a means of starting a new life.
Well, CPR shipping lines played a major role in the transportation of immigrants to Canada.
Well, Canada, and certainly maritime Canada in 1914, transported themselves in what we now look upon as rather old-fashioned ways, with the great ocean liners being a large part of their transportation in those days.
The Empress is one of the fastest and largest ships making the North Atlantic crossing. May 28, 1914 will be the Empress's 96th voyage. Of the 1,057 passengers and 420 crew, few have safety on their minds as they board the ship in Quebec City. The ship will leave Quebec City, take the St. Lawrence past Rimouski, a small village on the southern shore, and then out into the Atlantic on its way to Liverpool.
Travel in 1914 by sea was probably safer than it had ever been. If you discount the Titanic, there were, of course, accidents at sea. Accidents will always happen, but the advent of steam power meant that people could travel around the globe with almost complete safety.
But as with any travel, there are dangers. The St. Lawrence is a busy and sometimes narrow stretch of water. There are also drifting ice flows and often unpredictable weather. But perhaps the biggest threat is fog.
You just can't see anything. That fog is so dense. And it just settles right down, right on the river, like a curtain. There's partly no visibility at all.
The Empress has limited means of dealing with fog.
They had foghorns. Fog was just something that they never wanted to have to experience.
Captain Henry Kendall is making his first eastbound crossing with the Empress. An experienced seaman, he is well aware of the perils involved, but anticipates few problems on this routine journey. On the afternoon of May 28th, the mood of those boarding the Empress is one of light-hearted anticipation for the trip ahead. Lawrence Irving and Mabel Hackney relax on the upper promenade deck in first class. They are famous British actors who have just completed a wildly successful cross-Canada tour. Their cabin is one deck below the lifeboats and the cabins belonging to the senior officers and Captain Kendall. Mabel and Lawrence didn't plan to be on this trip, but are excited to be going home.
He was keen to get back to England for a number of reasons. In particular, what he wanted to do was to practice a new play that he was putting together. So he grabbed the opportunity to get on board the Empress of Ireland because it would mean he'd be arriving, I believe, up to a week or so ahead of the rest of his company.
Irving is looking forward to the journey more than his companion.
His wife, Mabel, loathed the ocean. She was often seasick and really very uncomfortable, I think, traveling foreshore. And I'm sure was not looking forward to an ocean passage.
Mabel and Lawrence's suite is next door to Frank Ernest Abbott, a self-made man who emigrated to Canada and established a profitable business.
Actually, he was born in Liverpool, England, came over in 1900 into Canada just after he got married. And he and his brother had a business, a millinery business in Toronto. And then they used to go to Europe twice a year on a buying trip. And they alternated going with the two of them for their millinery business. And so that's how he got to go in the Empress of Ireland that time.
The Hart family have second-class tickets. Bill and Emma are traveling with their two children, Edith and little Bill. The Harts have arrived by train from rural Saskatchewan. where Bill runs a butcher shop and also farms.
He wasn't a rich man by any means, but I think that he was comfortable.
It was a pleasure trip that they were going on. They weren't going on business. That my Uncle Bill was maybe going back and trying to bring some of his folks out here because he thought Canada was a pretty good place.
It is a particularly thrilling trip for young Edith, who has never seen the ocean before.
Things were tough back then, and we don't realize it. I can't imagine my Uncle Bill and my Aunt Emma, they'd just be in seventh heaven knowing that they're able to take a trip and go back to England.
Also on the main deck in second class are 167 Salvation Army members, headed for the Salvation Army International Congress in London.
The commissioner of the Salvation Army, Mr. Rees, was on board. And so there were many members of the Salvation Army bands.
Salvation Army bandmaster James Hannigan will be in second class with his wife Edith and daughter Grace. Hannigan can't wait to get to London, where his band will get to perform before a large audience. At 4:30, with the remaining passengers now on board, the Empress of Ireland slowly pulls away from Quebec City. Salvation Army members gather on the promenade deck to play. Many of those waving goodbye will never see their loved ones again. Shortly after setting out, crew members assemble passengers on deck to point out the location of the lifeboats. There are enough lifeboats to accommodate all 1,477 people on board. Each passenger is also provided with a life belt in their cabin. Captain Kendall also has specific safety procedures to follow, particularly if the Empress encounters fog.
She had watertight doors for her bulkhead. Each door had its own assigned crew, and in the case of an emergency, they would have to go to their particular door and then close it by turning a set of wheels and levers.
Having the watertight doors and portholes closed means that in the event of an accident, water is prevented from pouring into the watertight compartments of the ship and causing it to sink. In the calm early evening, lifeboats and watertight doors are far from the minds of those on board the Empress. But in a few short hours, they will be of grave importance. May 28, 1914. The Empress of Ireland has left Quebec City en route for England. Lawrence Irving and Mabel Hackney eat in a private alcove in the first-class dining room. Frank Ernest Abbott joins them for the meal. Even passengers in second class, like the Hart family, dine in style.
They enjoyed silver, tableware, they had proper china, they had table service.
By 10 p.m., most passengers have retired for the evening. A crew member begins the nightly walkthrough. As expected, everything is in order aboard the Empress. Captain Kendall watches from the bridge as the ship continues northeastward. With clear sailing ahead, Captain Kendall keeps the watertight doors and portholes open.
So all goes well until about 1:30 in the morning. The Empress of Ireland is now near Rimouski, where the river is a bit wide. First Officer Jones sights an incoming vessel about 6 miles away. It turns out that this vessel, the Norwegian collier, the Storstad, low in the water, heavily laden with coal.
The Storstad, piloted by Captain Thomas Anderson, is on its way to Montreal, traveling southwestward in the St. Lawrence. When Captain Kendall spots the other ship, he is cruising about 1.5 miles from the southern banks of the St. Lawrence. He decides to first head northward, away from the shores, across the other ship's bow towards open water, and then make a starboard-to-starboard crossing. When the Empress eventually passes the Storstad, the Norwegian collier will be on his right. It is a routine maneuver, common in the busy St. Lawrence. But as the Empress crosses the Storstad's bow and begins moving downriver, conditions change.
But at 1:45, fog rolls in and impairs visibility. Kendall reverses his engines and brings the liner to a stop. So at 1:47, the Empress of Ireland is dead in the water.
Even though Captain Kendall is supposed to close the watertight doors whenever fog rolls in, he doesn't order them closed. At 1:50 a.m., the Empress of Ireland sits silent and motionless in the water. As quickly as it first appeared, the Storstad has now disappeared into the fog. Captain Kendall's visibility is 0, but he is confident that if the Empress stays her course and the Storstad hers, both ships will have room to pass. But once in the fog, the Storstad changes course. The Norwegian ship begins to bear right and is now headed straight for the Empress. By now, the passengers are long since asleep. James Hannigan and his band have put their instruments away for the night. Even young Edith, despite her excitement at being on the Empress, is exhausted from the long day of traveling. Then, as Captain Kendall watches, the weather changes. The fog clears, and Kendall sees the Storstad headed straight for the Empress.
The fog bank lifts. The Storstad is aimed directly at the midships of his own vessel. He orders full speed ahead, but it's too late. The Empress has hardly gotten underway when the Storstad collides with the right-hand side of the Empress of Ireland.
The Storstad bow rips through the Empress, burying itself into a hole 20 feet deep.
The hole is below the waterline. 50,000 gallons of water every second pour into the stricken Empress. In a matter of seconds, the Empress of Ireland starts heeling over to the right-hand side.
At 1:55 a.m., Lawrence and Mabel are jarred awake by the terrible sound of the Storstad grinding through the Empress. So is their neighbor, Frank Abbott. Bill and Emma Hart are awakened by their crying children, who have been frightened by the wrenching sound of the impact. In second class, James Hannigan is knocked to the floor. All through the ship, passengers are awakened by the impact.
I should think they were just grabbing whatever there was at hand. They were rolled violently out of their berths. They were trying to get up, trying to figure out what on earth was going on.
The only hope for the Empress is to keep the Storstad wedged in her breech side to prevent the sea from rushing into the gash.
Captain Kendall had shouted to Captain Anderson through a megaphone, "Try to stay together, and we'll try to make our way to the shore."
The engine room is quickly flooded, and the Empress loses all momentum. The Storstad becomes dislodged in the river current. The water, just a few degrees above freezing, pours into the stricken ocean liner. Only now does Captain Kendall order the watertight doors closed, but it is too late. Lawrence Irving and Mabel Hackney manage to get out of their cabin. In the passageway outside, they meet Frank Ernest Abbott.
Lawrence Irving is asking, are we going down? And Abbott is not really knowing.
As they try to make their way to the deck, the Empress lurches, and Lawrence Irving is thrown into the bulkhead, breaking his nose.
And of course that was seen by Mabel apparently. And she was very, very distressed by this. This is absolute in the middle of the night and you've just woken up in the most awful manner. So it must have been just utterly horrific for them to try and scramble out.
In second class, Bill Hart realizes he must act quickly.
When they got out of their bunks, they noticed that there was water up to their knees, and many of them cannot even open the doors because of the slant of the ship.
Passengers in third class, among them members of the Salvation Army, are faced with the greatest challenge of all.
In first and second class, you only had to sort of walk out on the deck. But in third class, you had to go up a series of stairs. So the Empress was at a slant, and when a ship is at a slant, stairs don't work too well. You can't walk up the very slippery walls.
As crew members attempt to direct disoriented and panic-stricken passengers to lifeboat stations, the Empress continues to fill with water. Many passengers have jumped into the freezing black waters of the St. Lawrence out of desperation. As Captain Kendall shouts directions to his crew from the bridge, the Empress lists and he falls into the water. It is a race against time for almost 1,500 passengers and crew members aboard the liner. Despite having enough lifeboats to accommodate all passengers, crew members are unable to launch many of them.
The Empress of Ireland was only able to deploy 5 lifeboats because the lifeboats on the port side were totally impossible to deploy. They were leaning inboard. So most of the people had to jump into the water, and this was very difficult. Not many of them had their life jackets.
Water continues to rush into the Empress. In first class, Frank Ernest Abbott tries to help Mabel Hackney and the injured Lawrence Irving.
He was having trouble putting on her life jacket, and he helped them get her life jacket on. And then they told him, "Look after yourself, old man." And they went upstairs on deck.
Abbott realizes that time has nearly run out.
Well, my grandfather jumped over the rail into the water, and he was pulled under 3 times by the undertow.
And apparently Abbott did glance back once he was in the water, having grasped onto some kind of a piece of wood floating, glanced back and saw them on the railing, you know, clasping each other, and apparently that was one of the last memories they have.
In second class, Bill Hart struggles to guide his panic-stricken family off the ship. With the ship tilting beneath them, the young Saskatchewan family navigates with hundreds of other panicked passengers through the dark, upstairs and onto the deck. James Hannigan and his family are also in the grips of terror. Legend has it that feeling his end is near, Hannigan gives his life vest to another passenger.
At 2:09, the Empress of Ireland rolls over on her starboard side. And 2:10, the Empress of Ireland sinks.
This is all over in 14 and a half terrible minutes in the dark. If you survived at all on the Empress of Ireland, it was more a matter of luck than anything else.
It is just over a half an hour since the Empress first spotted the Storstad. In minutes, a peaceful night on the St. Lawrence has turned into a horrifying race to escape the Empress. Minute by minute, the luxury liner sinks deeper into the cold waters. May 29th, 1914. The Empress of Ireland, a luxury liner bound for Liverpool, has sunk into the St. Lawrence River after being struck by the Storstad, a Norwegian coal ship. Crew members and passengers are pulled aboard lifeboats and taken to the Storstad. A crew member aboard the Storstad spots a man in the water and throws him a rope. He grabs it and is pulled onto the deck. It is Captain Henry Kendall.
The Storstad played a major role in rescuing many people, especially because they took them on board, and many of the people went down into the boiler room to try to keep warm. Captain Anderson's wife handed out every bit of fabric she could, bed sheets, towels, whatever, to cover up mostly naked people who were coming on board.
Frank Ernest Abbott is also pulled from the icy waters.
My grandfather saved himself by swimming. In fact, he was pulled under 3 times by the undertow of the ship going down. And so he must have been a strong swimmer to beat the currents and be able to swim safely.
Survivors are taken to the nearby city of Rimouski. News of the disaster quickly spreads.
The news of the Empress of Ireland sinking flashed around the world literally within an hour of its sinking.
For family members of those aboard the Empress, the news is devastating. Among the dead are 147 Salvation Army members.
The Salvation Army was devastated by this event. In fact, we know that many members of the Salvation Army actually gave their life jackets to other people so that they survived.
Many of the bodies are never recovered from the icy waters of the St. Lawrence. Lawrence Irving and Mabel Hackney are among those unaccounted for.
I don't believe their bodies were ever found. Although there was some written correspondence, I believe, in the Times that the body had been found, and then they had to retract that.
6 days later, a girl named Eileen Tuggy discovers a body on the shores of the St. Lawrence.
As I understand it, she was walking along just on a daily walk, and she saw this little body.
And Eileen Tuggy was so touched by finding the body of this little 4-year-old girl that she put a bouquet of forget-me-nots in her hand. And when her coffin was opened in Quebec City for identification, they found a note from Eileen Tuggy and this little bouquet of forget-me-nots, saying that she hoped she would find out someday who she was.
It is Edith Hart, aged 4, the only member of the Hart family to be recovered. The two captains, Kendall and Anderson, both blame the other for the fatal collision.
The Mersey Commission determined that the Storstad was wholly at fault for the sinking of the Empress of Ireland.
Had the proper doors been closed, the liner's watertight compartments would not have flooded so quickly, contributing to the sinking of the Empress. Despite the element of human error, the real culprit is the thick, heavy fog that enveloped the two ships. Today, ships are equipped with radar systems that can pinpoint other ships' locations in the water, even in conditions of heavy fog. With radar, the Empress would have been able to detect the Storstad's change of course through the fog. Despite the tragedy, Captain Kendall and Captain Anderson both returned to the sea. For Frank Ernest Abbott, all that can be done is to try to move on.
As far as I would think that he wouldn't feel any qualms about taking another sailing ship to go to overseas.
Today, the Empress of Ireland, so important in the settling of Canada, is remembered largely for the lives lost on May 29, 1914.
It is a ship that brought over so many of our pioneers. We do believe that today, residing in Western Canada are at least 400,000 descendants of those who came over on the Empress of Ireland.
She was remembered fondly by the people who had once been her crew, and she was especially fondly remembered by the people who had once sailed her to begin new lives to Canada.
Sandwiched between the twin disasters of the Titanic and the Lusitania, the Empress of Ireland has become Canada's forgotten disaster. But for the descendants of those lost during the sinking, it will never be forgotten.